One of the questions back to that famous week following the eruption was, would you bring your son? Would you bring your son to the island right now? I couldn't answer the is it safe question. What I could answer is the probability of those people to get killed by the eruption, the teams going on the island while they were on the island. Effectively, what we estimated was for the first recovery operation, the risk of one of those guys to get killed would be about 4%. Now, 4% on one hand seems quite low, but actually if you think about going to work and 4% chance of getting killed, that's enormous.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of No Ordinary Monday. This is part 2 of my conversation with volcanologist Nico Fournier, and if you haven't listened to part 1, I would really recommend you go back and start there, because these 2 episodes kind of sit together and you'll get a much fuller experience hearing the story unfold from the beginning. So a quick recap from part 1, Nico relived the hours and the days after the Whakaari White Island eruption and the recovery operation that followed. And in particular, his role in deciding when and how it would be safe for teams to go back to the unstable volcano. They were going back to retrieve the bodies of 8 victims who sadly lost their lives that day back in 2019. I've had some incredible feedback from you guys since that first episode went out, so huge love and thanks to you guys who reached out, because genuinely it means so much when you take the time to message and reflect, and also just to share what resonated with you. So in this episode, we find out that Nico's story didn't end when the recovery operation finished. Today he reveals what came after that. The legal inquiries, the sort of global conversation around volcanic tourism, and the much harder question beneath everything. How do we actually talk about risk when it comes to unpredictable volcanoes that are also irresistible to tourists and visitors? Alrighty, so where are we going to drop into in this episode? As you heard in the cold open, at one point before the recovery, Nico and his team estimated that the risk to the recovery teams returning to the island was about 4%. 4%. Exactly. It is a number that sounds small, but would you go to work if you had a 4% chance of not coming home? I didn't think so. We're going to unpack how that number was calculated, what it means, and how events like Whakaari White Island reshaped conversations about risk and responsibility and decision-making under uncertainty. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. And again, it's a side of the story that I was missing from the documentary, like I could tell, both those documentaries were fantastic and told fantastic stories about the survivors and what they went through. Yeah. But I guess and they touched on a little bit of the fallout, like what happens after that. We talk about, there was 8 bodies on the island, but you're only unfortunately able to recover 6 of them. Mm-hmm. Like when you got back and when it was decided that there would not be any further subsequent rescue attempts for those 2 bodies, like, did you have to face those families again and say, look, what we've decided that we're never going to find them?
So I didn't have to do that at that time, just because police at that time had already engaged a lot with the families, and we had some family liaison as well. So they knew pretty much, I think at the time, that there was one last shot that we could give to retrieve the loved ones. So I think some families might have gone around the island afterwards, just in the odd chance that you never know what you can find. I know that after the second recovery operations, so I was based in a helicopter at that point in time, and we had to basically call it a day at some point. What we did was actually following the currents with a helicopter, just in the odd chance that you've got something that you can spot from the air, etc. So it's that difficult point in time where you say, okay, now we know that we are in that tail of probability in terms of likelihood of actually success, effectively. But let's give it a crack. Let's get that extra few percent of chances, whatever we can grab, whatever we can do to actually try to do that. But as expected, we couldn't find anything at all.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of once all the dust is settled, often, maybe not everybody, but certainly some people would look to someone to blame for an event like this. I mean, how do you even begin to go about that? Is it just Mother Nature, or Should the tour operators never been there in the first place? I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020. Should they have, given everyone a little bit more of a, hey, this is a risky situation? Or should they have taken more hindsight or more awareness that I'm sure the tour guys are watching your, level 1, level 2 situation? Should they be, anyway, all these sorts of things are running through my mind, but obviously before that, it doesn't happen at all. So what was the fallout in that respect?
Yeah, so we probably need to mention that the event has been followed by 2 legal inquiries. So we've had a first inquiry, which was called by WorkSafe. So it's basically a part of the New Zealand government which looks after health and safety at work. And the intent for that, or the scope for that inquiry, was to look at basically the moment of prior to the eruption, ending at the time of the eruption, and basically at the processes that could have led to an adverse outcome on the date. So what I mean by this, this looked into the death, for instance, of the tour operator guides, because they are employed by tour operator companies, and those have a responsibility to ensure the health and safety of their employees. Likewise, if you run a business, or not actually, if you have, we've got something that we call a PCBU obligation in New Zealand. And what this is, it means that basically it's an obligation to ensure the safety of your customers if you actually have them doing activities under your company or your organization. So what that means practically, it means what was the level of responsibility of the tour operators, but also us as scientists, in terms of ensuring the safety of the visitors, of the staff that were involved in the eruptions, etc. So that was the first inquiry that was finished basically a couple of years ago. The second inquiry that is still ongoing is what we call a coronial inquiry, and what that is, unlike the other one, it doesn't lead to fines or kind of financial retribution. Instead, it leads to recommendations for systemic improvements. Yep. So it's divided in 2 phases. The first one is that's just past late 2025 was basically the hours following the eruption. So it was very much focusing on the rescue operations, not even the recovery operations, just the rescue operations in the hours following the eruption. And this is basically in terms of whether anything could be learned in terms of how that was managed and so on, with a different outcome or not for the people involved and the victims. The second phase of that inquiry, which we're getting into soon in 2026, is around all the period leading to the eruption. And this is the one that is actually touching on exactly the point you're mentioning, which is about adventure tourism at active volcanoes. So I won't be kind of preempting, I guess, any of the outcome of that inquiry. I guess for me, there are a few lines of thoughts and learnings that have come through over the past years, because it's been plus 5 years and a bit now already. One of them has been around how, as scientists, but also as, I guess, emergency management practitioners, how we not only estimate, but also how we communicate risk. And also trying to unpack a bit more the is it safe conversation, which actually, is it safe is 2 questions. What is the risk, and is that risk acceptable? And I think very often we oversimplify the is it safe by yes or no, but it's actually a very different value proposition. So one of the questions, back to that famous week following the eruption, one of the first questions I was asked by one of the police officers, who was extraordinary, but he trying to get some answers and tangible outcome of those conversations so that he could make some informed decision as to whether or not they could go back to the island to recover those bodies. One of the questions he asked me was, would you bring your son? So I've got a son. Would you bring your son to the island right now? And I said, well, I'm not sure that answering that question is really going to help. So the example I took there was the example or contrasting 2 situations where It's about understanding what the level of risk, but more importantly, it's talking about risk tolerance and whether is that risk acceptable, and for the rewards I'm getting. So the first situation could be you're outside of your house and you see your car outside of your house is on fire. And in that car, you might just have bits of papers, nothing of value at all, basically, just bits and pieces. So you have got a high level of risk, and you may decide not to get into that car to pick up those few pieces of paper because the reward is not worth it, basically, and you don't find that the risk is acceptable. Now, you take the same situation, same car, same fire, same risk, but you put your son in there, you put your kids in there. I can't say what I will do, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will probably think about grabbing in there, trying to grab their kids out, right? The level of risk has not changed. It's exactly the same, but the risk tolerance has increased drastically because the reward is totally different.
Yep.
So this has been around. I think the risk conversation is something that we need to unpack. So the risk conversation too often stops at the risk assessment. Very, very rarely do we talk about risk tolerance. And that was one of the accelerated learning from that eruption as we were trying to actually unlock that risk assessment in the days following the eruption. I couldn't answer the is it safe question. What I could answer is the probability of those people to get killed by the eruption, the teams going on the island while they were on the island. Exactly right. And then once we unlocked that on our end, effectively what we estimated was for the first recovery operation, for the 3 hours that the teams would be on the island for, the risk of one of those guys to get killed would be about 4%. And basically, that was falling broadly within the type of risk that the explosive ordnance disposal teams would be taking on the job. So I remember the time when we finally unlocked that conversation and were able to actually broadly estimate with huge error bars, of course, but that's the best we could do at the time. So broadly speaking, I think we're talking about broadly kind of that percentage. Now, 4%, on one hand seems quite low, but actually if you think about going to work and 4% chance of getting killed, that's enormous. That is enormous. Yeah. None of us would take this kind of risk. No employers would think this is actually probably a good thing, with the exception of some of the police, armies, etc., where they face those kind of situations. So I remember at the time very vividly, the officer in charge for the police gave me the biggest high five I think I've had in this in quite a long time, and effectively say, again, expletive, we can do this, that we can work with those numbers.
Wow.
And I think, more widely, I think it was for that particular operation. But I think genuinely it comes back to the question of risk tolerance and who is making that decision. So without geeking out too much, but the risk tolerance can often be split in two. One of them is the risk to an individual. And then basically it comes down then to that individual's tolerance to risk. So say you, Chris, going to Merapi. It's basically there is a level of risk with your families. Well, is that risk acceptable for me as an individual? And I would argue that you're probably the best person to make that decision. If you can understand risk and what your tolerance is. But there is a different type of risk, which is the societal risk. So this is where it gets complicated, because it's not the risk for one individual, it's the risk of someone getting killed by an eruption. And this is the difference between having, say, just one or two persons going to that volcano on a regular basis, versus having 300 people going there every day. Of course, if you want to mitigate that societal risk, you can decrease the number of people going every day, for instance. And so this doesn't come down in terms of decision-making to the individuals. It comes down to the authorities basically allowing people to go to the tour operators, etc., etc. So,
stuff.
Long story short, I think it's been around one of the big discussion and conversation in our field has been around risk and how we communicate risk.
And that 4% is fascinating, because I'm sure that was a very difficult number to come to. A lot of work was put into that. But if you had to Is it possible for you to kind of even conjure a number for what that risk percentage would have been on the morning of those people going there?
The answer is no. The way we come up with those numbers is quite sophisticated, and it basically is a two-step process where the first step is basically we try to estimate the likelihood of an event that would affect the people in that area, basically, over, say, the next 24 hours. So you've got different ways of going about it. So now we've got more and more sophisticated ways to go about it, but nothing really is proper real time. And because of the very highly nonlinear nature of volcanic processes and the huge uncertainty. So the way we tackle that on our end at the moment, and yet exploring other options, is by doing what we call an expert elicitation. So what an expert elicitation is, it's a way to actually get experts' opinion, to collate it, and to come up with a single number out of a multitude of numbers. So the way we would ask, for instance, a question, so the question we might have asked our team was, so a group of experts would have been, what do you think is the probability of an eruption occurring over the next 24 hours that would affect the area where the teams would be? And then basically you might ask for your best guess. You might be asking for the minimum you think, that is kind of under which you would be very surprised, and the maximum over which you would be very surprised. So kind of three numbers. And then we take everybody's opinion there and we come up with a single number with an error bar on that. So that takes quite a bit. It's a process that we've probably, I wouldn't say we've mastered it, but we're getting quite good at it. We're getting proficient at it. We were able to actually turn over those things quite quickly. But what it does require that unavoidable discussion that you need around the data and what the data actually means. And not only your data as a specialist of earthquake, for instance, or gas, but also what everybody's bringing in terms of the understanding of the symptoms of what's happening. So that discussion plus the elicitation itself would take a few hours at least. And that was one of the big conversation, and one of the outcome now as well is how can we provide some form of risk assessment in near real time when we just don't have the luxury of time. And and I don't think we've cracked that just yet. Basically, we're working actively on it.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we've talked about kind of what's happened from a policy point of view, I'm guessing. I think it goes without saying that all tours have been sort of suspended onto the island. You can do sort of aerial tours and boat tours, but anyone going to the island is off. And I'm sure there's been a huge number of policy changes nationwide on how, adventure tourism is looked at, particularly when it comes to these highly unpredictable events. But take it from you personally as Nico, like before and after this event, like how do you compare those sort of two people? What's changed in you?
Yes, a really good question. Probably quite a deep question that we need a few things to unpack.
Or maybe a better way to sort of think about it is like, once all said and done, you've kind of got, everyone's the recovery operation is, finished. You've got everyone you can do. You arrive home, crack open a beer, probably, what was kind of going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest immediate learning, if you wish, from that, and it was a learning that was as we went literally in the day, so in the thick of it really, was that, and you really had as a scientist especially, or as a subject matter expert, it doesn't have to be science, could be anything, you have to make sure that whatever advice you're providing has a landing space. So it has to be actionable. As much as we love volcanoes, for me or my colleagues, as much as we love volcanoes and as much as we love to quantify risk, we quantify things, etc. If that information is not actionable, we are probably missing the target. We're probably not hitting the sweet spot there. So one of the things, for instance, that we did is those 4% I was talking about. We could actually provide that quite quickly, not on the day, but that's something that we could provide quite quickly afterwards. But what we actually realized at the time is that quantification of the risk of fatality we were actually grossly overshooting the type of scientific advice that we could provide. There was not a landing spot for that because there hadn't been a discussion by the authorities or the way they actually operated in terms of what threshold was acceptable, was not for them. So we would be able to provide that number, but then it didn't have a landing spot where it could be evaluated and say, oh yeah, that's fine or that's not fine. So initially we had to go back to slightly simpler form of science advice, which is the usual risk matrix, which has basically the consequence and likelihood with different colors basically on there, from green to red. And for us, it felt like it was going backwards because we had been there before and we had gone much further. But the point was not to provide the best possible advice. The point was to provide the best possible actionable advice. And I think that's for me, that's a big.
Because clearly you had already been provided. It wasn't like you guys were negligent because you were constantly monitoring the volcano in the weeks and months and years before the event, and you had raised the level to 2. And I guess that it comes back to the risk tolerance thing. Is the tour operator clearly every morning or probably throughout 24 hours is constantly looking at that sort of what is it going to be, level 1, level 2, level 3. And they had made the decision that level 2 is fine. We're going to go out there because, we've been out for level 2 before and nothing's happened. But it's just really, it's very easy to say in hindsight that they shouldn't have gone out there. But like even, I guess that's what you're saying, is that you're trying to provide actionable information in a way that a tour operator might look at level 2 and go, maybe there's a 10% or 5% or 4% chance of something happening, but that's not a risk that we're willing to take, and I guess that's the hardest thing, is to create a level system, or maybe there should be, a level, a 2.1 or 2.7 or like, that kind of thing. Like once it gets past 2.5, that's past our level of risk, but it's kind of hard to know what to do.
Yeah, so I think the solution here, or maybe part of the solution, is maybe not so much into the numbers, because we can crack numbers. That's something we know how to do. And I think the problem was not cracking the numbers. I think the problem is in the dialogue around risk. And I think if we go back to who is actually making the decision. So if so I love mountaineering, I love climbing. There is a level of risk attached to that, depending on the conditions. I make continuous dynamic risk assessment, and I sometimes get it right, sometimes get it terribly wrong. But one of the ways where I can try to make an informed decision is by being able to compare that risk to something I can relate to. So the dialogue around risk, instead of us, I think, providing numbers, is probably more around that level of risk of getting killed, basically, by a volcanic eruption. Could be anything, really. Is the same than, say, driving between, in New Zealand, Auckland, Wellington, 3 times in a row without stopping and being drunk.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel? And I think, that's right. And I think it touches on something as well, which for me has been a very sobering realization as well, is that as much as I love to think that decision-making is evidence-based, purely evidence-based, that it is rational, etc. The reality is that there is a very, very strong, dare I say, dominant emotional component to decision-making. And I think unless we acknowledge that, which I think I've failed to do for years, realistically, and I think all of us do, or may do, unless we acknowledge that there is an emotional component to decision-making, we will not progress in that dialogue. So we'll keep progressing on the techniques to provide those numbers. We'll keep cracking numbers, but we won't be actually achieving the, I guess, positive difference, because we won't be able to engage in that dialogue in a meaningful way, and something that people can relate to, really.
I love that, going from a level 1, 2, 3, 4 system. It's, imagine if you're driving an hour on the motorway and you've had 10 pints and you're on a motorbike kind of thing. Like that's what we've come down to in terms of like, that's what our numbers are translating into. Would you take that risk? And then that's people going, okay, maybe I wouldn't do that, after a whole night session. But that's fascinating. It's just a very human, it's just a very human thing, dealing with, risk and large groups of people and how we decide to live our lives. So it's amazing.
And we don't make quantitative risk assessment every single day, right? That's the reality as well. Is as much as I love to do that, and I advocate for that every day for our partners and agencies and authorities, 90% of the decisions I'm making I'm not doing a quantitative risk assessment for those. So
absolutely, yeah. I guess kind of more globally, I'm sure things have changed nationwide in New Zealand, but after an event like that, I'm sure the global, volcanologist community would have had discussions and conversations. Has it kind of impacted how other countries may approach? Because, again, I can walk out, I can drive, 30, 40 minutes and be up an active volcano. No one's going to, admittedly, the authorities here have stopped people from climbing to the summit, but that's about it. I guess globally, has there been a wider conversation about how we approach volcanic tourism?
Yeah, so I think there have been huge discussions. This is a very topical thing. We've got examples. So we've had people getting killed at other volcanoes since then. We've had people including Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken. Italy has been in the same position where we've got people as well at Stromboli or Etna getting either close calls or affected, and same in many other places. So I think the from an international standpoint, there have been two main directions of learnings, I would say, for beyond the hardcore volcano science around the predictability or forecastability of those tiny eruptions. I think one of them was around, the precedent that this set of having an inquiry to volcanologist in terms of and questioning of the role of volcanologist, etc. So and responsibilities of volcanologist. It is not a first in earth sciences. We've had an earthquake in Italy, L'Aquila, where some of our colleagues were basically prosecuted there because it was deemed that they had a level of responsibility and duty of care for some of the people who got killed there. Who got affected. So it was not a first, but certainly in the volcano space, it was a first. So this has attracted a lot of attention, and a lot of countries have been and colleagues have been just keeping an eye on development and what it meant for the wider communities. And I think operationally there are a lot of learnings in terms of how you document everything you do, how you document your decision making, how you're just able to present the facts, and how you've gone through those processes. So. And a lot of our colleagues overseas, I know, have already either were doing that already or have basically taken that as a good prompt to step up in that space. So that's certainly one of the aspects. The other one is around volcano tourism, indeed, and how to approach that. So we've created a bit of a work group of international interested parties, basically volcanologists, and we're coming up with a number of tools that hopefully will help in that space a little bit. So one of them is checklist, for instance. So some of them are targeted to tourists, so that they can make hopefully better decision. What do you do if you want to visit an active volcano? What do you do? What does it mean? Before, during, and after. So before could be, do you know that there are volcano observatories that you should be checking there? If it's a guided tour, maybe take a guided tour. Question the risk. Question, compare it with things during it, basically respect whatever is being put in place to support the risk mitigation. And then after is more around basically learning what you've done, clearing new stuff as well, because it's quite an aggressive environment, as you know, at Merapi. With the ash, with the gas, etc. So there are a number of things we're doing in that space towards the tourist, also with different audiences like tour operators. There are wider conversations around roles and responsibilities, but this is where really the devil's in the details, because ultimately it becomes then very country dependent. Mm-hmm. So the roles of volcano observatories, the roles of local authorities, the roles of national park, the roles of guides, of mayors, etc., will vary hugely around the world. So this is where there is a limit in terms of the learnings you can draw, because they will not apply everywhere. I think ultimately it's probably the one thing that is quite common to everything is that volcano tourism is probably unavoidable. Yes, you can totally mitigate volcanic risk for tourists if you stop any tourism activity. I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we felt that it was a viable option. And frankly, the majority of us think that it's great to see volcano. That's why we do this. That's why we do what we do, because we love volcanoes. So it's completely understandable. So I think there is an appetite there. So it's more around what kind of things can be done to engage in that meaningful conversations around that, almost regardless of the local legislative framework and roles and responsibilities.
And I guess, it's having all this work that you guys are doing, putting in, frameworks and checklists and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, one of those powerful tools is trying to have better prediction abilities and technologies and whatever tools you need. And I know how hard it is to predict these things. I mean, is that ever going to get sort of to a point where, because it's like predicting the weather, for example, we've got better at it, but still, freak things happen and all this kind of stuff. You're trying to predict the weather under the ground and underneath, the mantle of the earth and all this kind of stuff. Are we ever going to get to a point where you can predict these things accurately, or is that just sort of a pipe dream?
Yeah, I think it's, we're getting better. And I think what we are getting really better is at understanding when the volcanoes are becoming more restless. So to go back to maybe a medical analogy, what we are, I think, genuinely quite good in now and quite confident doing is saying that the patient is a bit sick. What in most cases we can't tell is when the volcano is going to cough. Or when the patient is going to
throw
cough.
Up.
Or throw up, depending on how you feel about it. So, and that's always that thing. So this is when, Whakaari, we raise the alert level to 2, say, hey, that volcano is more active, more like, probably more, what it means, it's more likely to erupt, but we can't tell exactly when. So that last bit of forecast, which is not so much, the bigger picture, where we can broadly estimate we can try to quantify that as well, but it's really what is really the crux of it is those last few days, hours where things go pear-shaped. So there are volcanoes where it is possible, but usually those are volcanoes which are quite specific and tend to be, I'm going to say, well-behaved. I know my dear colleagues who monitor those volcanoes will probably very disagree with that. But volcanoes like in Iceland, Reunion Island, or Hawaii to an extent as well, where we've got quite an understanding of the behavior, but also the viscosity of the lava or the magma when it's underground, and some of the physical properties of that volcano means that the signs are perhaps a little bit clearer than in some of the other volcanoes which don't erupt as often and often erupt more violently. So those volcanoes, we are closer to achieve that, and in some cases we've had some really fantastic success stories. I've experienced one of those when I was working in the Caribbean before coming to New Zealand, when I was working at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory near a volcano called Soufriere Hills in the island of Montserrat. So that's in the Eastern Caribbean. And we had a period of time where in late 2008, where the volcano was erupting more and more regularly, but we could actually really see on the seismic signal, so those wiggles that we observe, the ground vibration, we could actually see a pattern that was repeating and that would correlate beautifully with what was actually happening at the volcano, which meant that for a few days, I would be able to, as I say sometimes to some of my colleagues, was able to call the governor of the island and say, hey, Peter, we probably, if you want to see a nice little eruption and maybe just have a drink at the observatory outside after work, etc., it's probably going to be at 6:45 tonight, and it would work really well. So it was quite fascinating to actually be able to experience that, even for a volcano that usually doesn't quite fall into the easier to forecast category. And again, I'm using that with a pinch of salt. Every volcano is different. Yet the same volcano, shortly after, we flicked a switch. I don't know what switch we flicked, but we flicked a switch, and literally we lost all correlation between what we were recording and what was happening at the surface. And then basically the only way to actually see what was happening there and actually eventually making a decision as to evacuate the populations, which were still living further down the valley, a few kilometers away, was by literally spending the night at the observatory with infrared thermal cameras and basically trying to understand at night and during the day how far those pyroclastic flows were going down the valley, and effectively set a yet another gut feeling threshold, a little bit, to be honest, in terms of, bringing that expertise together into a single sentiment. It's like, when do we start to feel really uncomfortable? And that was the question and the conversation we had with the staff at the observatory. And basically we came up with a bit of a threshold there, is that if pyroclastic flows tend to go down that area, we'll start to feel very uncomfortable. It sounds like a very natural step to basically trigger or suggest an evacuation. And that's what we did. And then we had an eruption basically the following morning after the evacuation, and nobody got injured, etc. So we're not there yet. Basically, that's a long story. There were interesting learnings though about that experience. If I may expand a bit on that.
For sure.
It was not so much around the science of it, but it was around, again, back to the people. We're always back to the people. We've got this wonderful Te Reo Māori expression in New Zealand, which is, what really matters. It's the people, the people, the people. Tangata, tangata, tangata. And so one of interesting thing of that experience in Montserrat was that we had that eruption. So the volcano had been active, erupting a lot. We still had people living down one of those valleys. The eruption was progressing. It was filling up those valleys higher up on the volcano with those deposits from those pyroclastic flows. And then progressively, the pyroclastic flows started to actually go farther and farther away from the volcano, eventually to the point where we had to suggest an evacuation of the residents out there. So we did that one night. An eruption occurred, or series of eruptions occurred in the following morning. Nobody got injured. We managed to be confident enough in our understanding of what was happening that the residents were allowed back in their homes for a few hours to pick up some of their stuff the following day and basically evacuate back, and then eventually came back the other day. So the reason why I'm mentioning that is one of the learnings there was we were treated as heroes, basically. And I don't think I've felt so loved in many ways in my life, where people say, oh, you guys have been absolutely awesome. You personally have been awesome. You've been, you knew where it happened. You just kept people safe, etc. And it made me feel really, really uncomfortable. And so, invited to have drinks, to have some food, fantastic. It was a bit of celebration of success, really. Yeah. But the point I started to bring into the conversation is that, hey, so it worked really well. It worked really, really well. But what do you think you would have, I was talking to them, what do you think you would have done? Do you think you would have invited me to share some food and maybe a drink, etc., if we had evacuated you, but no eruption had occurred? Mm-hmm. And quite immediately, I guess the sentiment changed quite a bit. It's like, well, yeah, probably not. Yeah. So my following questions say, well, yet wouldn't evacuating still have been the right option, the best option with what we knew? And I think, if I had to distill that in one polyphrase sentence, perhaps, is that I think for me, one of the massive learning, and that's probably one of the biggest learnings for me, or learning, and I guess really, it's the understanding, but it's also really kind of the true deep appreciation of that you shouldn't judge the value of a decision-making process exclusively by its outcome. So what that means, it means that basically you could have an absolute wonderful outcome, yet poor decisions. And I think all of us, I'm going to be a bit gender discriminant here, but I think all of us teenage boys who've survived teenagehoods can attest to that. I don't think that our survivability has been exclusively attached to good decision making. And when I'm bringing that learning to the island, to the Whakaari White Island experience, it's almost the other way around. The same principle, but the other way around is people died on the day, and undoubtedly there are some things that hopefully can be done better in the future, etc. Yet some of the decisions that were made probably still were the right ones, yet the outcome was not a good one. So I think it's, if I had to philosophize a little, that's been probably one of the deepest learning, I think, for me personally as an individual over the past couple of decades based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sort of, the whole decision-making aspect of it is, it's incredibly difficult when the consequences are so high, but the thing that you're dealing with is so inherently unpredictable. You can make a good call and have a good result, or vice versa, And I guess that kind of leads me to, because we're in kind of philosophy mood or mode at the moment. At the end of your career, when all's said and done, what do you hope to have achieved or have a legacy of, or what's your ultimate goal that you want to have by the time that you retire?
So, I mean, one of my so I've got a almost like a jokingly answer to that, and a more serious one perhaps, which I'm yet to think about and formulate. But I'll start with the jokey one. I think for someone in my role, something I've set quite jokingly initially, maybe 10, 15 years ago when I came here, especially when I started to take on the I guess the heading of the volcano observatory side of things, was, I think in my career, basically, if the worst possible things that could be happening could be to basically an eruption at Whakaari with visitors on the island. That would be one of the worst things that could happen that I felt for me would happen. The other one was having to raise, and so that one there unfortunately did happen. The second one out of three was having to raise the alert level at one of our supervolcanoes. Now, funny we should say that, because that's actually what we had to do a few years ago in 2022, 23, around Taupō volcano, which is one of those big caldera. Is that for the first time ever, we felt that it was the right thing to raise the alert level. So I've ticked that box as well, unfortunately. So the next one really is around, I thought at the time would be some restlessness or even eruptions in Auckland, which is our biggest city in the country, 1.5 million, that can come with very little warning. And I think that if I had even to manage or help manage an unrest in Auckland, I think I would have ticked all the three boxes and would happily retire soon. So that's for the perhaps for the slight joking answer to your question. More fundamentally, I don't think I can. I'm not really thinking about legacy. There is some. I talk about legacy sometimes with my colleagues, and I think when I talk about legacy, it's really about leaving the place better than we found it. So I think this is really the legacy I'm talking about. There is no particular monument of science or monument as a piece of work that I feel is anywhere deserving from legacy of what I've done. Basically, I think it would be presumptuous perhaps, and also not very realistic. I think if I'm hoping to be able to achieve something is basically keeping people engaged in those conversations. And I think that's really genuinely what I'm hoping that I'm promoting is with my colleagues, with students as well, with some of our authorities or partners, etc., is basically just really giving that sentiment that we're all in this together. And if there is one piece of advice I tend to give is to be courageous, because a lot of those conversations are really not easy conversations. They can be very confronting, whether it's to talk about, what it would take to evacuate Auckland, for instance. And I can give kudos to my emergency manager colleagues from the city who are hearing those very confronting facts, and yet saying, okay, well, not thinking about it, not planning for it, not doing anything about it is just not optional, really. So let's embrace the conversation. So I think if there is anything I'm hoping to leave behind, is not so much of a legacy of something achieved. It's probably more an attitude to our profession.
People are sort of more willing to have the conversation about, okay, we need to look at this a little bit more detail. We need to be prepared. It's taking the mountain rescue kind of approach to it as well. You have to be prepared for every scenario that you can think about and all the ones that you can't think about as best as you can.
That's right. And with humidity, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the supervolcano thing, like, That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about asking about supervolcanoes, but if a supervolcano goes off, it's not just like an island, it's like an entire hemisphere that you've got to worry about, right?
Yeah, so this one there is quite a. So we've got a few of those in New Zealand. So one of them is literally I can see it from my house. Is I live literally a few minutes away from Lake Taupō, which is basically part of it is a succession of big craters or calderas which have been left by two large eruptions, and not that long ago. And that volcano is still very much active. So we had a period of time every I'd say few years or decades. Certainly, we've got periods of earthquakes, etc. That do happen. We've got the ground swells in places, so it is very much alive and kicking. The beauty of those volcanoes is that yes, they are. I think we have to reframe the thinking about it. We tend to think about, oh, that volcano is doing something. It is a super volcano. It will basically destroy the whole of the North Island, which we know it's pretty much capable of doing. There is no questions there. We can see it on the roadside when we do a cut. We can actually see all the deposits. It's probably more useful to rephrase it as a volcano that is capable at times of doing these massive eruptions. And then it opens up a more useful conversation, which is actually that volcano, one, the vast majority of those periods of unrest do not lead to an eruption. That's the reality. And even when they do, the majority of those eruptions are actually quite small eruptions. So they wouldn't affect huge areas, etc. Only very rarely do we have those huge eruptions. And those huge eruptions basically do require quite a lot of magma to accumulate at depth, etc. So they can't happen that often because it takes time to mature the wine, basically, as my grandfather would say.
And we're talking like centuries rather than decades, right?
Yeah, very much so. So this Lake Taupō, for instance, we know for some great works by some of our colleagues in a university in Wellington and around the country that it would take actually quite a while for that magma for that system, if you wish, to recharge in a way that would be capable to produce a caldera forming eruption, which, as you said, then could effectively affect quite a large area. So in which case, basically, I think, generally we probably planning for those things is incredibly difficult. That's the reality. What do you do? And it's always the question is, do we plan for those? We can plan for the small ones. Do we plan up to what point do we plan? So do we plan for a meteoric strike? Do we plan for those very large eruptions? So we should talk about them. We should keep doing that. I guess they remain in the slightly unmanageable categories for quite a while there. The fun fact around that event, though, was that the day we raised the alert level, I was basically coincidentally, I had to go overseas and to fly overseas for some work and conference or some meetings. So it's a small community where I live. It's a small town of a few tens of thousands of people. So we all know each other quite well. And so the day we raised the alert level, which was quite interested in the media, etc., basically I was seen at the airport with my bags, basically just leaving the area because I was flying overseas. So I had to basically have a good conversation with a few people working at the airport. So no, it is not related to what we've just done. I'm not just flying away because everything is going to turn to dung. No, it was planned. It is not something like this. It was not a very good look.
It sounds like some of my Hollywood movies, like the sort of volcanologist has found something that's like, oh, the world is going to end. I'm just going to quietly get to the airport into my secret bunker in France back at home or whatever it is.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh man. But yeah, it is interesting. You are living in a risky environment. You are taking a risk living where you are, as am I, living in a volcanic kind of region. So kind of interesting to see those parallels with the people that unfortunately went to Whakaari on that day versus anyone that lives in an earthquake zone or a volcanic zone. It's worth everyone listening to have a think about where you live right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you willing to take the risk?
Well, that's right. And to what benefits, right? I think the benefits for me of living around here is also feeling closer to nature. It's an awesome place to, if you love the outdoors, the mountains, etc., running up the hill. And there is something to be said, I think, within reason, of course, but about living in a place that gets regularly affected by natural hazards. I think the reality for me, I feel far more resilient, for instance, now having lived in New Zealand and before that in the Caribbean, that probably I would feel if I had continued to live in the UK, for instance, for decades afterwards, just because we get pummeled by earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, cyclones, etc., and hurricanes in the Caribbean. So I think it just teaches you a little bit how to be resilient. And the other thing, it's back to the people again. It teaches you as well that in those moments, this is often where you see the best of people. You see the worst of the events, but you also see the best of people.
That's true. I think we saw that in Whakaari as well, very much so. So, I mean, just very finally wrapping up, I always like to ask guests, if anyone listening is a aspiring volcanologist and sort of wants to follow in your footsteps, kind of what advice have you got for people listening who might want to do that? Or, what does it take to be a volcanologist? If you, who shouldn't be a volcanologist?
Yeah, that's right. So I would say that, be better than me, that's for sure. Please do. Please be better than me, because we need to keep moving forward. And I don't think this is a very achievable challenge to anyone. So that's going to be easy. So I would say volcanology is not so much of a science per se. Volcanoes are the objects, and you look at them through a range of different options, whether they are seismology, whether they're chemistry, whether they are geophysics, whether it's geology, whether it's social science, whether it's communication in terms of how you best communicate. Mm-hmm. So I would say if anybody is quite passionate about volcanoes, it's finding the things that makes them tick as well in terms of what kind of disciplines, what kind of angles would they like to bring to the table for those conversations. And then basically just get right into that. One of the unfortunate things, as mentioned earlier, is there is very little that is getting taught in the university system about volcano monitoring. So if you want to work as a volcanologist in a volcano observatory, which is only one of the options, you can also have a career in academia. You can be a teacher, and all of those things are awesome. But if the thing that is really kind of interesting you more is to work in a volcano observatory, you will have to basically learn on the job. There is no other options. So what I would suggest here is once you do your degree at university in any of the disciplines you're interested in, is do perhaps two things. One of them is you could be doing internships in volcano observatories. So contact either your local volcano observatory, if there is one. If you live in a country which doesn't have one, just look for volcano observatories around the world. And we've got a list online that we can maybe put as a link to the episodes where people can have a look at that. Where we've got a World Organization of Volcano Observatories we call WOVO, which we're rebuilding it at the moment, and we're trying to put more and more information. So go to that webpage, check the country you're interested in, and we've got some links to the observatories there. And basically contact those guys and say, hey, I would love to do an internship for you, maybe over the break, over the summer break. Don't necessarily wait to be paid. That's the reality for those things. Often, especially if you go to developing countries, there may not be any budgets for that. So what I did and what many people do is you have a summer job, you do a bit of work there, you put some money aside, and then maybe the last month before you get back to uni, you just basically travel and volunteer effectively in one observatory. So that's one of the options. The final one I can think of is if you do some research projects, whether it's through your postgrad mostly, maybe, basically find a project that has a link or collaborators in a volcano observatory. And then you will hopefully have the opportunity to do both your academic work with a university, but also maybe spending time and learning the rope a little bit within that operational context, which otherwise doesn't get taught. So yeah, that's what I would broadly suggest to anybody who's interested.
That's great. That's really, really good. I think it kind of leads me on as well. Just finally, if there's anything you'd like to plug to people, I know you do a lot of work in these organizations, or there's social media stuff that you might do, or anything you want to reach out. Where can people find you or see what you've been up to?
So I used to be a bit more active on social media and haven't really for a few years that much. I mean, I put a few things on Instagram, but very poorly. I'm probably a middle-aged man now who's not as good as others as putting things on social media. So it may come and go. I might have period there. So if you look for my name on social media, you will find me, Nico Fournier, for sure. Probably more importantly, we've got a number of organizations and that are probably worth mentioning. So one of them is I was mentioning earlier, is the World Organization of Volcano Observatories. So WOVO is basically trying to connect and advocate for volcano observatories around the world. So we've got a website that people can have a look at, especially around the list of volcano observatories around the world. But there is also a overarching international association of volcanology, and this is more. So this is basically the umbrella organization for Observatory Association, or that organization, WOVO, but also other aspects like research, like teaching, etc., etc. And one of the things that people may not realize is that what we do with that association is we share our research, we share our learnings, but also we try to provide opportunities to some of our colleagues from maybe slightly less privileged countries to come to conferences, to exchange, to basically work and have access to resources from more privileged countries. So you don't have to be a scientist. Anybody who's interested can actually donate to that organization, to that association, to the IFSA, and we can use then those funds to support colleagues from a range of less privileged countries to come to some of the meetings that we're organizing at times and offer grants basically to students and to people like this. So if there is one thing that people can do is have a look at the website, see what they can do, and more than happy to donate if they want it.
That's amazing. So just remind us what the website is there, Nico.
So the website is, so the name is an incredible name. It's called IFSA, which is basically IAVCEI, and it stands for the International Association of Volcanology and Chemistry of the Earth Interior. So it's quite a mouthful. But the website is a bit simpler. It's ifsavolcano.org, and that's basically IAVCEI volcano.org, and that's where you can find that. Otherwise, you just Google it and you will find it.
Fantastic. We'll put all the information in the show notes so people can find it, and absolutely please donate, because there are volcanoes all over the world, not just in places like New Zealand or Indonesia. There are places with people that may not have the resources to come and study them and need to learn and have the infrastructure and the resources, the knowledge that you guys are putting together. And I think it's such a worthwhile thing to do. So if anyone listening has the opportunity, please do donate if you can. So fantastic. But yeah, listen, Nico, thank you so much for all the time you give me today and sharing the story and all your insights. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. Thank you very much, Chris, for having me and for enabling me to share some of those experiences and what we do. And I'm looking forward to listening to your other podcasts, because you always have some amazing people coming in, and I find it just bloody awesome to listen to those. So thank you very much for having me. Absolutely. Fantastic. All right. Have a good day, man. Thank you very much. Bye. And that's a wrap on part 2 of Nico's incredible story. A huge thanks again to Nico for taking the time to share his experiences on the show. And of course, a big thanks to you all as well for listening and watching and sharing your thoughts on the show. It genuinely means so much that you guys are enjoying these episodes. If you'd like to learn more about Nico's work, the organizations we mentioned, or anything else from these 2 episodes, you find all the links in the show notes or over on the website, noordinarymonday.com. And as always, you can watch full video versions of these episodes on YouTube, and we share clips and updates across our socials, which are LinkedIn, on Instagram, and the No Ordinary Monday podcast community on Facebook. Next week on the show, we step into a completely different world. I'm joined by legendary burlesque performer Angie Pontani. She is an incredible dancer who spent decades mastering the art of tease, satire, reinvention, and commanding a stage. We talk about what burlesque really is, on and off stage, the discipline behind the glamour, and what it takes to build a life and career in an art form that's often misunderstood. I love this episode because it's bold and funny and super genuine, and also gets into dark and surprising places as well. I can't wait for you guys to hear it, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are 4 simple ways that you can enjoy the show. Number 1, subscribe or follow on your podcast app. Number 2, click 5 stars or leave a short review. Number 3, share the episode with a friend, a family member, or maybe a colleague. And then finally, number 4, support the show at buymeacoffee.com/NoOrdinaryMonday. If you do any one of these things, it helps us keep the show independent, we can avoid adverts, and allows me to keep bringing you amazing guests and stories week after week. And that's it for this episode. This podcast is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. We'll see you next Monday.